Hello, hello. Okay, there we go. Hello, DC. Thanks for coming out on this kind of chilly evening. Yes, we are here with the one, the only Michael Twitty, talking about his tome recipes from the American South.
Not a toe.
It's quite an extensive book, and I guess first we need to define what we're talking about. So, what is the American South?
Okay, so hi y'all. I'm glad to be home. Everybody thinks I'm from Atlanta or North Carolina, New York or something. I'm like far from the truth. I'm from Chocolate City, born and raised on not far from the Carter Barron on Kennedy Street, and yeah, this is our place, our town, someplace. Saw a little thing on Instagram the other day ago, showing the first film footage of the Metro from the late 70s. I was a baby then. I mean, I was just born. The Metro was like 3 years old. That's so wild. So what is the South? The South is not the Confederacy. How do you take a place that's been settled by human beings for 13,000 years and reduce it to 4 years of white supremacy rule? Yeah, I'm going to go there. Because you can't. I mean, that's what people mean by that part of Southern identity. They don't mean everybody. They don't mean all of us. The Confederacy is me, 3/5 of a person, and that's you're talking to somebody who acknowledges his multiple Confederate soldier ancestry, right? I'm not unaware of that. So we need to make it even more expansive. If I said to you, part of Delaware, well, what do you mean? Well, if you've ever been to southern Delaware, you understand it was the same culture, same economy, same language, same customs as the rest of the Chesapeake, down to the end of the Civil War. There's no wall going. You have just, and I love when people say that when you cross between D.C. and where Arlington Cemetery, which is actually called Arlington House Plantation, that's the unofficial border between the North and the South. Do you all feel a change? Do you feel all of a sudden your accent, your clothes shift? Your walk, something in your walk? No, because the entire area was exactly the same. There was no difference. There was no massive cultural difference. In fact, when I lived in my other lovely homeland of Maryland, and if you are from Maryland, you don't say Maryland. Okay, I know where you is and where you from. And the woman it's in Montgomery County where I live most of my life. I live in Fredericksburg now, where dreams go to die. And like she's saying to these union, she's a woman from Montgomery County, Maryland, with maybe 10 enslaved people on her small farm. And she tells the Union soldiers, I really don't like you being at my house, but I insist on you having some good Southern cornbread. That's her exact words. And when you hear the transcribing of the way people talk, it's that local colorist thing in the 19th century. It was how people entertained themselves. People didn't have a TV, they didn't have a radio, but they would read these little fun stories about people from other parts of the world and the country to understand how they were. And so the Southern vibe is it's massive. And it's massive because there were a lot of people living in Maryland and Virginia and soon to be Washington, D.C., right? The problem is that the main staple of the economy, tobacco, wore out the land. And when it wore out the land, it ruined the land for 30 years. That is over half of someone's lifetime in the mid-19th century. So a lot of people picked up and they moved. So we know a lot about the other southern states. But if you consider the fact people in Mississippi today will be like, Virginia ain't the South. Okay, really? Where did your great-great-great-grandpa come from then? Because it wasn't Mississippi. Mississippi was the Old West. It was the wilderness. Mississippi becomes a state in 1817, Alabama in 1819, and the Civil War is when? 1860, 1861. Right, December 1861. 1860, right. And so you have to think about this like, wow, how did this Southern identity become so congealed? And so, the stereotypes come fast. Well, it's about the 1780s when, I think was it George Mason or Charles Carroll? One of those guys. And he talks about, the South. And he says, by the South, I mean Maryland and the states south of it. So there's a very distinct identity that people acknowledge, that Mason-Dixon line thing. But here's the problem. There's no such thing as you leap over a border and all of a sudden everything's different. There is no sweet tea line. There is no grits line. It's sure as hell no sweet tea line. The minute McDonald's was like, oh, let's make sweet tea available to everybody, it's not just because people want to drink sweet tea, right? It's because there are so many people with that Southern heritage across the entire country. Think about it this way. One of the hearts for Southern people was actually Philadelphia, because that was a port. And the Germans and the Ulster Scots-Irish coming through there, and then they take the Great Wagon Road down through the Blue Ridge, the Piedmont, and Appalachia, extending all the way to the Ozarks in Missouri and Arkansas, okay? And then you have the people who are, it's basically a British Isles thing, with the exception of Ireland. People bring up Ireland a lot, but they really mean is Ulster Scot. They don't really mean Catholic Ireland. They mean people brought from lowland Scots, brought over to the Ulster plantations by the British, over in Ulster, Donegal. This is where my Irish roots are from. And so there's that. Then you have to think about the fact that these people picked up and moved, and the largest forced migration of human beings was not the Trail of Tears, it was the domestic slave trade. 1.2, if not more, people of African descent. Most of whom come from where? The DMV. Yep. And so you have that issue. And these people are extending all the way to Kentucky, Tennessee, and Missouri. Missouri was not the Midwest. Missouri was a little bit of everything. Lots of little Dixies, the boot heel, all that. I say all this to say that people's concept of the South, if you ask Texans, are you Southern or not? It really gets deep. Like they are kind of, I don't want to use any mental health terms, but confused is the best word. Especially from the deep east of Texas, some people say, absolutely, I'm Southern. Some people say, no, I'm absolutely a Texan. Okay, I don't want to go into that right now. We got to talk about food and recipes. But Oklahoma, definitely. I would, you know, it's okay if Oklahoma's South by Southwest, with a little bit of South by Midwest. Baltimore, right, is definitely Mid-Atlantic by Southeast. I had the occasion to be on the same program as David Simon in England. And it was cool to talk to him for like 2-3 hours. And he said to me, even though he grew up in, you know, the burbs in Silver Spring, he says, going to Baltimore to do journalism was like going south. The mentality, the way the city was lined up. And what you get is, what I've come to understand is, what people, these imaginary boundaries people have in their minds, really come down to one historical fact. In the 1840s, when the Germans and the Irish arrived in massive numbers, they shifted the way things were done. All those cities, Baltimore, then you go across Wheeling, Louisville, going down in St. Louis, going across down to even towards the top of the 20th century to Austin. All those cities have something in common. Large German and Irish populations that did not want to assimilate into the English patrician plantation culture. Number one, because it was very difficult to do so. In Louisiana, that didn't happen. Everybody became a Creole. The names were modified. People married into those families. They changed their genealogies. So you could say you had one ancestor from Alsace-Lorraine when you didn't, right? But there was a different story. Now, I would argue that the South is expanded by Black people. I think Up South is Black. I think that...
How do you define Up South?
Up South, thank you. Up South is what happens when you have large Southern Black communities that pick up and go to Cincinnati, Detroit, Chicago, Kansas City, other places, even the Bay Area, LA, you know, Great Migration. But you know, the Great Migration is the heart of it, but over time. Because first we have to get through Underground Railroad, freedom seekers, right? Free people of color saying, I'm out. And they bring with them a very distinct Southern way of organizing culture, churches, restaurants, you know, jazz clubs, blah, 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 over time. Great Migration technically is 1910 to the gate of 1970, but there were other, exodusters, other migrations. And so what happens is people are in contact with their southern relatives, and there's a back and forth migration. So eventually, the turn switches over to black Southerners who go back to the Deep South, and they keep sending people, family back and forth, and that helps black culture in America kind of congeal, right? But the last part of that Southern question involves the Southern Midwest. People forget, like, the Midwest is actually in two parts. So you have the Rose Island, Welcome to St. Olaf part of Midwest, and you have the, Drew Carey Midwest, and then you have Southern Ohio, a lot of which is Appalachia, Appalachian Highlands. You also have Southern Indiana and Illinois. Like my former partner, he rested in peace, his family was from Anna, which infamously meant ain't no allowed. Those were in Little Dixies and other places where they were growing like lots of tobacco and other stuff, and the culture came with them. And why is that area Southern? Because people from Kentucky and Tennessee, Virginia, the Chesapeake had constantly settled that part of the Southern Midwest. But there's another aspect to it too. All those states had laws that said, we don't want any black people. So it was Southern white people who did not want to compete with enslaved labor. I don't blame them, because they would have been completely undercut. They could go there, they could farm, the farming land was good, and they could live. And one of the things they were really against was, it wasn't just enslaved people in their labor. They didn't want to be next to a culture that they saw as degenerate. But they kept the food. There was nothing about the food in Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio, in the southern part of those states, that's any different from Kentucky or Tennessee. None. Absolutely none. It's the same stuff. In fact, they're selling, at the time of Lincoln's residency in Springfield, when he lived there, they were selling okra as part of the seeds in the newspaper. So they'd absorbed all that stuff and brought it with them. Okay? So that's that. So I think the South is a verb, I think the South is a noun, and it's an adjective. It's all three at the same time. And there's no one way of talking, even though if you look at American movies, I learned this and it broke my heart, y'all. They have one dude that does all the Southern accents for Hollywood, and he's never actually been to the South. And then they made the mistake of having Dolly Parton. Remember that Steel Magnolias? Like, you can't be gay in Southern without knowing that entire movie. It's like scripture. And there's like Dolly Parton. Hey, y'all, I'm from East Tennessee, but I'm pretending I'm from South Louisiana. Really? Ma'am? Like, it was wild. It was just like, who y'all fooling? Who are you fooling? So there's that kind of like minutia of the South. I mean, it would be hard pressed to put somebody, say, for example, from South Georgia in Western, not West Virginia, and have them, but it's the same region, but with very different parts to it. That was a long answer, but you needed that. You have to have that part. All right, lay it on me. I know what you're about to ask next, so come on.
Well, we are
start humming.
in Washington, D.C., and people have lots of questions, and there's debate about this, just like Texas. Is D.C. the South?
Absolutely. It was founded during colonial antebellum slavery. Georgetown was a port that eventually becomes part of the city. Its sub-designer, Benjamin Banneker, was from a plantation economy in Maryland. It's definitely, and it's not just that. I mean, of course, I think of Atlanta. I think of DC like I think of Atlanta or Charlotte. What happens in Atlanta and Charlotte, DC happened first. You understand what I'm saying by that? Like, they start off as these core southern urban areas, and then everybody wants to move there from other places, and so it becomes more cosmopolitan and more multi-regional than it does one region. So when people say to me, "Oh, I'm from the South, I'm from Atlanta," girl, you ain't been in Atlanta for 2 weeks. That ain't the same as being there forever. And it's very hard to find people in Charlotte and Atlanta who are like nuts and bolts of that place. There's people who've been there for 2 generations, and now the children have never grown up with snowshoes, but the parents did. Because they came, people literally say, there was like a wall in the Museum of the New South in Charlotte of all the things people brought from Wisconsin and Minnesota and Michigan that they no longer needed once they moved to Charlotte. And I found it fascinating. It was all their winter stuff. Clothes, tools, winter tools, snowshoes, skis. I'm not making this up. And at first, I had to think about that, right? But DC to me, it's the when we lived on Kennedy Street, it was the honeysuckle that my grandmother utilized. Right outside. I didn't know from anything else. It was the fact that all of our families, all the black families that I knew, there was never milk on the table. I remember the first time I went to a white person's house, and there was milk on the table, and I thought, oh my God. Now, of course, not being at them, my fellow Jews, there was never milk on the table. Very goyish. But milk to drink with dinner? Are you crazy? What are you, nuts? No, you drink tea with dinner. Iced tea at that, right? Or you drink Kool-Aid, or water, but you don't drink milk. Ugh. Not very Southern, But my grandmother did drink buttermilk, and so she wasn't the only one. My Virginia grandmother, my dad's mom, was from Prince Edward County, Virginia. And they were more of the DC migration, And then there was my mother's mother, and her parents were from Birmingham, Alabama. Okay? And almost all the black adults I knew were either local and from, or they were from just off. That's where the southern part of DC is centered. Okay? Now there's the old money part of DC, Baltimore, Richmond, that is very much the people. But I think even in our own area, we've had people move around. Frederick has a certain connotation to it. People moved away when this became an area of black middle classness, right? But Prince George's County was the most rural, most slave-owning area of this part of Maryland. So you have to think about it in those terms. There's also a national, international city. So it's an immigration city, it's a national city, And I worked on the Smithsonian Folklife Festival when we did DC. So I had a lot of time to think about this 20 years ago. Think about how many layers I lived in as a Washingtonian. But DC is a southern place, absolutely. And one of the most sterling examples of this is when you go through Georgetown and you see all those, 19th century houses, and you know how you know them? Because that back building is not a garage. It's the stables and the slave quarters. That's what you're seeing. And you can still see the enslaved bricklayers on those the fingerprints, I'm sorry. And not to mention that there's one house in, why do I forget all these names now? Because I'm getting older. But it's in DuPont Circle. And I always wondered why that house looked that way. And he was a contemporary of Joel Chandler Harris. He was a big Southern writer. And I forget his name at the moment. But he designed the facade of his house to be like the Virginia plantation he grew up on. So these markers are all the place. And then there's a Southern cookbook from like 1890 something. And the woman lives in DC, just like the first Southern cookbook was written by Mary Randolph, who ran a boarding house in DC, and who was the first white person buried at what is now Arlington Cemetery, when it wasn't a cemetery, it was just a plantation. So that's what makes it Southern to me. Mm-hmm. Regardless, Southernness does not count on continuous affirmations of a certain deep South stereotype that we've become used to. Because Harrisonburg to me is just as Southern as Lafayette and Bow Bridge. But the different types of Southern, we have to acknowledge and respect that. And so is DC is the same.
So how did this book come to be, and like what inspired you to write it?
Insanity. So books like this take 4 to 5 years to go from concept to publication. During the COVID period, before it came down, Emily Takutis, when the main food editor at Fightin, reaches out to me, she says, I really want to do this we do these cookbook Bibles. So I want you to help me find an author. She was very specific about somebody who was younger, who was not known. So I tried that. I couldn't find anybody who wanted to write 400 recipes or 300 recipes and do all this stuff. So then I said, well, maybe I can co-author it with somebody. That would be fun. I won't have to do all the work myself. So that didn't work out. That took about 3 months. So finally she goes, why don't you, hey dude, you can do this. And I had the self-doubt and the imposter syndrome and the fear all went into me. And I said, well, I don't know. Then I thought about it. When I first came into food writing, I don't know about you, food writing, it was like, first of all, nobody was born a food writer.
No.
Everybody was something else. They were accountants and lawyers. And this was a hobby that they turned into their lucrative, mansion builder. And I didn't come from that. I grew up when I was small, watching Natalie Dupree of late, New Southern Cooking. We didn't have no Food Network. We didn't have no cable. We had PBS on a Saturday afternoon. That's what we had.
PBS started my love of food. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had that. I mean, Martin Yan, Justin Wilson, who was a fake Cajun, but he did well. Told many off-color jokes, and Natalie Dupree, Joan Nathan, Natalie Dupree having Edna Lewis on one particular episode, and other people were telling stories. Great chefs of the West, great chefs of New Orleans. Those very tantalizing me as a 5 to 8 year old. I was a very precocious reader, and I loved cookbooks. And my mom was a major influence. My mom would have me sit down and write out definitions, culinary definitions. So she's like, and I would get quizzed on it. So I'm like 9, 10. She goes, what is chiffonade? That's when you cut things, little strips of the vegetables. Okay, what makes gazpacho? I was like, well, it's usually served cold. And da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, great. And then my mom was like George Patton in the kitchen. You didn't play with her. You did one thing wrong. You got the hell out. But I knew I would get called back in because I was the only kid. I had, we go to work in ethnic households. We get put to work. And Southern households in general, children are workers. And then when it starts out, you think it's a game. You think it's kind of fun. Let's go to work with grandma in the garden. Boy, pick them weeds. Okay. Right? Then you get tired and hot. Oh, you tired? You hot now? Uh-huh. Do some more. And so going to the grocery store was torture. I used to love it, but I used to hate it. I loved it because my father, my mother, my grandmother, and my uncles would get me little treats. And that was, But also I had to stand around watching my grandmother and mother sort through green beans. And I hated that. But you know what? I could pick the best green beans in the store today. Going to the farmer's market, there were different ones in D.C., but there was one, it was underneath some kind of underpass, and my father helped get that going. And I remember the watermelon men would come up, and they would talk Carolina. The accents would start changing, and the subjects, and they'd be like, okay. So I got that experience. So when I took on this book, I'm taking on my childhood, family history, things that I had been told and learned and heard over a long time. And I had interviewed all 4 of my grandparents. I made sure to do that before they passed, which is always a surprise. My father's parents did not pass on until I was in my late 30s and early 40s. So they lived a very long, almost a century each. My mom's parents, not so fortunate. 13 and 15. Pretty young for elders. But I absorbed everything I could from them. Like, what did they grow in their gardens? All these questions. And then, of course, I did the Southern Discomfort Tour when I started to forget who I was. I was in my late 30s. And I was just like, who am I? Where did I come from? And I really hated being in this hamster wheel of identity. Also, by that time, I had been part of the Jewish community for, 10, 11 years. And so I had a different sense of who I was. And so I had to figure out where, I could say we're from this place. I wasn't comfortable going, we're from Alabama. I knew we're in Alabama, but I only been there tangentially a couple of times. Mm-hmm. I wanted to go back there and see it. I wanted to learn about the food too, right? And then came going to Europe. I spent as much time as I could in the UK and France, and I got to go to Denmark, and I got to go to Italy, and got to go to Switzerland and other places. What's the relevance of this? Italy is the only other place in the world, like the South, the regionalisms, the ecosystems, and also the fact they name all the foods. Italians have the al telefono and puttanesca and, diavolo, and there's names of things. You don't just go, this is the pasta with the clams, the tomato sauce, and the whatever. You know how y'all be in your generation. This recipe is some craisins and some curly fries and some like.
I'm just going to name the ingredients.
Yes,
That's
I'm
what
not going to
this
give
is.
it a name and a soul and a spirit. UK, obvious. That's the fatherland, right? Scotland, England, Wales, right? Then Ireland on top of it, which is not British. And then we have to talk about why Scandinavia is important, because the Vikings invaded and they're part of my ancestry. And they also transform along with the French, Norman French, the culture and food of the UK. And then France is easy, right? France is like the motherland for Western cuisine, also Louisiana, you got it, Mobile, whatever. Then I went to Africa 8 times, right? Senegal, Gambia, Salon, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Togo, Benin, Nigeria, Cameroon. Every time, also bringing chefs with me, people saying, I can't afford to go to Africa, where are we gonna make it work? I don't know what I have to do to get you to Africa, we can get you to Africa. And I always have these amazing experiences. So I was ready for this. The hard part was editing my brain. I'm a neurodivergent person who is very nerdy, very blurty, and I'm obsessive, like most good food people are. And I just had a lot of facts. People ask me, what did you learn that was new? Not a damn thing. And I'm not being arrogant about that. I'm just saying, when you kind of, I don't watch shows and know every character, but I can tell you everything you want to know about how to skin a possum. And part of that for me is wildly human and wildly American, because it was something to go to a farmer's market in southern Indiana. And I had this long conversation with somebody who I probably didn't have a lot of political views in common with. But we were talking about black walnuts and persimmons and pawpaws, like they were our best friends. And I was like, wow, I'm working with some knowledge here and some things that would make me an awesome person to talk to in 1890, but not that great in the 21st century. You know what I'm saying? And that's a loneliness to it also. When people know other things and can do other stuff, but here you are, a historic interpreter and a culinary historian, a food writer, and your best friends are the people who remember what little bits that they learned from people that lived 150 years ago, right? It's like you have to ask yourself the question, how many hands does it take? So my grandmother knew her grandparents who were all born in slavery. My father, of blessed memory, who lived to 83, born and raised in D.C. his whole life. My father knew his great-great-grandfather, my great-great-great-grandfather, who was born in the 1830s, who was still alive. He lived to be 112. And some people on Twitter, fuck Twitter, were like, oh, you're lying. They just probably got it wrong. Don't you try me. I'm post Alex Haley. I know what the hell you're going to say to me if I get something wrong. So, of course, I verified that nonsense. You know how I verified it? Not only the picture, but the certificate, not only that, but when he went to go sign up with the Union Army, in the, what do you call it, the Freedmen's Bureau. And they asked the questions like, who were you enslaved to? Where did you come from? Where did you work for? And right there it was. Born in 1838, 39, the same time Abijah Slade appropriated his enslaved hired man Stephen's method for processing tobacco. He was in the tobacco plantation economy and lived to 1953. My father, what got me, the story that got me all the time, gives me chills. My great-great-great-grandfather, he walked him down to the creek. He had a cane, but he was pretty amble. And he was really hot. And he told my father, would you lift up my shirt and throw water on my back? He was teaching my father how to catch crawfish, like for fun. And he lifts it up, and my great-great-grandfather's back was covered in scars. Not as bad as Gordon, the image they're forbidding, but he had whip marks. And he didn't understand what that was. So he asked his mother, what is that? You never asked the elders what your trauma is. That's how he learned. So my father touched the hands of a man who was born into slavery. Yeah. And what's even wilder is that my great-great-great-grandfather had a direct ancestor named Wonder Booker, who, watch this, he wasn't called Wonder because he was so old when he died. It's called Wonder because his he was born in the 1600s and died in 1810. And when you were that old as a black person who was enslaved, they actually gave you an obituary, which nobody else had. So he lived from the 17th century to the 19th century. Watch that. Why he was called Wonder? Because his mother had him when she was in her 40s. So that puts me roughly, my family history in Virginia going back to the 1640s. So I have that too. I mean, I know where my people came from. I know all these different lines. I've paid thousands of dollars. You have the cooking gene. You've read some of that. It took me a lot of money and time. People don't, it's not easy, it's not free, it's not a reparation, it's what it is. But all that goes into my appreciation of Southern food and cooking. You know, I'm of the land. As soon as my ancestors' bodies are buried in that land, that gives you the food, the fruits, the trees, the fish, the everything. This is not an amnesia thing. It's just about I am part of the food and the process. Yeah.
So this is a cookbook, obviously. And how did you go about selecting the recipes? What would be included, what wouldn't be included, the versions of what is included? There's like 5 or 6 different biscuit recipes.
You right. Cornbreads.
There's a few
hot
different
water cornbread, skillet cornbread, North Carolina cornbread, So you put on a big list. I forgot fried okra, y'all. Oh, I know, right? That's gonna give me some serious trouble with some people. I mean, but I also forgot, comeback sauce, and I didn't forget, but I was kind of discouraged by a friend of mine who's helping with the baking part, Smith Island cake, which I really should have done. And scripture cake. You know what scripture cake is? It's an old Baptist and Methodist lady cake. So what's what you do? I'd say not old, in terms of like old school. Something that you would bring to like dinner on the grounds or potluck or something. Yes. And that, long, revival thingies, yes. And homecoming and revival, which are 2 different things. Revival is to bring people to the Lord. Homecoming is to bring people who have left the area, who come back to the area to visit relatives. So scripture cake, I am Jewish, but I also come from a semi-Southern fundamentalist light background. And so we had vacation Bible school and memory verses. And so I had my personal best was around 200 memory verses of the King James Bible, all the short ones, of course. And so you had to know, once you knew them, they give you a little candy, a little something. And yeah, that's it. Ma'am, we need to talk. Because that's exactly it. That was it. And so scripture cake goes like this. If it mentions apples, like it does in the Shir HaShirim, the Song of Solomon. So you'll say a quarter cup of, this verse. It doesn't say the actual thing. It says you need this much of this and this much of that and da-da-da-da. And that's scripture cake. Write big lists, then you start to edit them down. How many recipes have this? Why so many biscuit and cornbread? Because it's the staple. Mm-hmm. And they're not all the same. Even the hush puppies are not the same. Eastern North Carolina versus Arkansas, Mississippi Delta, not the same hush puppy. Very different. And I didn't even really eat them the same way. One is eaten with catfish, one is eaten with barbecue, whole hog barbecue, which I think a lot of people come to Eastern North Carolina expecting like Kansas City barbecue, Famous Dave, and they get very disappointed because there's a big old hog thing chopped up with a plate. So you know what I'm saying? With the so-called barbecue sauce on it. I'll leave that alone. So you go through this large list, you edit it down, and you also have to think about what's iconic. Sometimes the dishes are very similar, like okra soup and okra gumbo, right? Or succotash and makshu from Louisiana. So you have to really think about what do you want to show that kind of has a duplicate. Or even jambalaya and shrimp pilau. They're very similar. They're not that different. I could even go on even worse. Jambalaya con gris from Louisiana is old school. Nobody talks about it because nobody makes it anymore. But jambalaya con gris is basically the same thing as Hoppin' John. Although one has black eyed peas, it'll be the California black eyed pea, which is white and black eye, And in Gullah Geechee country, you use red field peas, Sea Island red field peas. And at the time I'm, working on this book, I'm working on my garden. So my garden reflects what I'm writing because I'm growing the heirlooms that I'm cooking to the recipes. I didn't take a single picture with this book. They have a really gorgeous setup in the book if you've seen it. And the team at Fiden is fantastic. I also give them very specific instructions. No red and white tablecloths. I don't want it to look hokey. I don't want people to open this book and start hearing harmonicas. Banjos, I'm okay because of Rand Giddens. But I'm not cool with dun, dun, no, 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 no. And then the guitar picking. I hate that. That is not my heritage. That is some nonsense. Somebody said, that sounds Southern. Okay. It's like me saying, okay, let me make some New York stuff. Let me have constant honking and peeing in the alley. Right? So that's how. And then you start working on the list. Every recipe is 12 to 24 to 36 hours. Okay, I like a lot of context, a lot of history in my stuff. But I'm also talking about the actual recipe, the techniques. Remember, this is not just written for an American audience, it's written for an English-speaking international audience. So you've done that. It's like you have to really make sure everybody understands what you're doing. And sometimes some of the ingredients just don't match. There was by the time I got to England, it was oh, we don't really have sorghum here. And all their maple syrup is from Canada. I'm what do you have? They're well, let's do Lyle's Golden Syrup.
Not the same.
Not the same. You know how I know it's not the same? I was in England on Shrove Tuesday and had English pancakes. And they had Lyle's Golden Syrup on the table. I'm oh, treacle, how fun. I feel like I'm in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Treacle and Turkish Delight. When I was so excited, we were little and read that book to try Turkish Delight. One day our third grade teacher brought in Turkish Delight. And I said, what is this shit? This is the worst stuff I've ever had in my life. What the hell is this? I was so excited. I was it's that exotic Turkish Delight. And, Lucy and the wolves and the fawns and all that. I thought our class was going to sprout into a bunch of furries, and it didn't happen. Biggest disappointment of my life, other than unclothing He-Man and finding out he had nothing. I literally wrote that in a book. You have to break through your boundaries somehow. So people remember you. Okay, what else we got?
You threw me off track.
Of course I did.
So one of the things I love about this book is that there's talk, at least on the internet, about we're losing recipes. And so you went through the work of putting them on paper. Yes, there's biscuits and cornbread and things that everyone's familiar with, but then there's also recipes for frog stew and possum and things like that. And thinking back to also talk about ingredients in your garden. And I remember my dad and grandmother talking about these tomatoes are flavorless and things like that. So the ingredients themselves have changed. So how do you sort of take into account the changing ingredients in writing recipes?
That's a fantastic question. Because my mother, of blessed memory, reminded me when she was forced into retirement and kind of not always doing great, I would bring her things from my little poor man's garden in Rockville. And I would grow things like Kentucky Wonders and Brandywine tomatoes. And my mom would say things like, I haven't tasted a tomato that tasted real like that in a long time. Kentucky Wonders were a big, more modern-ish now heirloom that was grown. And a lot of people knew because they were very long, and you were good for snap beans and all that. So you want the color, you want the flavor, you want to be able to approximate, because guess what? This word authenticity just sucks. Do you really think the people in the medieval times had the same things people had 500 years before? Absolutely not. Even though they never they never moved more than 20, 30 miles from the place they were born. Things always change. Things are always dynamic. Nothing is static. It says in Koheles and Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun, right? And so you have to make, you have to translate a lot. It's an act of constant translation in the food and the recipes. And I really did want to include 20 more of these things, but it takes so long. And it's not just testing. It wasn't a whole ton of testing. There was testing on most of the cookbook, but it wasn't always in my kitchen. So that's also that. I got to wait on feedback and thinking about so there's a lot of different layers of just like, how do I make the best approximation of what it's supposed to taste like, look like, feel like, and the emotional feelings that it should evoke. It's not just, it's not just, okay, anybody, not anybody, I shouldn't say that's insulting. I was gonna say anybody can make a Yankee pot roast. Okay, or the real baked beans, not the baked beans that we know. Southern baked beans ain't real baked beans, but we'll pretend they are. They're not like New England baked beans, which are a whole different story. So I guess there's a lot of this sort of like letting go that idea that if I don't have this or that in the exact same way, it's less authentic or less important or less true. You know what I'm saying? And Southern cooking in particular, people had different standards of what was important. Those standards were ethnic, those standards were regional, cultural. I mean, just because most people in the South did not make gumbo and roux and that stuff outside of Louisiana and outside of Mobile and Biloxi. That was not a thing. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, when Cajun mama would ask their child who their mama is she Catholic, and can it make a roux? Those were the standards. And then the wedding vows, I love you more than 100 pounds of boudin. That's something in the gut. And until you go to Louisiana and have the boudin and all that stuff, you don't understand why it's so important to people, why it's like a thing. Or Eastern North Carolina, very specific way of cooking. Chesapeake Bay area on both sides in Virginia and Maryland, very specific. Maryland stuffed ham versus Smith Island cake versus the way we do fried chicken. And there's an okra soup that is indigenous to this region, right? But it's not going to be the same the minute you get to Missouri and Tennessee. And if you really want to know, there's one recipe that I really wanted to do, but I thought it was going to be gross, so I didn't do it. You want to know what it is?
Yes.
Turkey and freshwater clams. Because in this era, what do we have? Turkey and oysters, oyster dressing. Well, what do you think happens with people who were born and raised in these tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay, pick up and move to Missouri, and in the what they call the purchase in Kentucky and other parts? There used to be a plethora of freshwater clams, many of which have gone extinct because of pollution, or just not safe to eat because they are the filters of the polluted water. But that was a thing. First of all, not Beltsville USDA turkey. We're talking about the turkey running around the woods that is eating certain things and has very dark, greasy meat, and that with freshwater clams. People thought that was a delicacy. And the fact that many of the things that people think, oh my God, would I eat that? People didn't eat them. There's this myth that we tell our children that, yeah, they didn't have nothing else to eat, they just ate whatever. No, they didn't. Not at all. That wasn't true. There's a reason why enslaved people had a taste for the muddier catfish, possum, squirrel, coon, and rabbit. And a good Southerner knows that they are not always available at all times of the year. What is rabbit time? There you go. What is squirrel time? It can be. Summer to fall. Good. What is possum time? The winter. You don't want an animal that's breeding and angry and full of hormones. You want them when they're at their juiciest. And by the way, you don't just go out there and say, hey, possum, I'm going to make you dinner. The way to do it was you caught the possum, you brought it home, most trafe thing ever. You caught the possum, you brought it home, you fed it neutral human food for like a couple of weeks, 6 weeks. And then when it got really fat and juicy, there goes the pet. But nobody ever ate roadkill. They knew better. They didn't eat deer and stuff. Now, if you just hit a deer and it's fresh, okay, well, no. But people didn't do that when they went hunting. They knew the breeding patterns of animals. They knew when they were going to have their offspring. They knew how to they didn't eat all the stuff at one time, right? Okra leaves. I want to do so much more. But I didn't think that I had to explain everything. I didn't want to explain everything. And also certain things just not common enough, like okra leaves, sweet potato leaves, black-eyed pea leaves. All those were eaten, especially by black folks, right? That's really important to understand. But yeah, like you have to make a lot of decisions. And sometimes I had really sleepless nights. So I worked with Dr. Jess Carbone, who was a fan already. And Dr. Jess, she says, the only person called me Dr. Jess. It's because I'm black. We're the only people who we go Miss Nancy, Mr. Bob, Dr. Bob. Instead of, I could call it Dr. Carbone, but she became a PhD in culinary history. So we have a lot to talk about, right? So we'd be on the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning, debating every little thing. And not in an adversarial way. It's like blurred, conversation till one of us says, you know what, I got to go to bed. I got a kid, and I got to go to bed. I got animals and a husband, that kind of thing. So that's how that worked. It's over time. It's a lot, but I'm very grateful. Nancy McDermott, if you know her, Southern food cookbook author, helped me out a lot with the baking and pies part. Jordan Wimby, who is a friend of mine, she goes by Melanin Martha on Instagram, which was cool. And then one day I woke up and I was like on Holly Springs, Mississippi. She's from Chicago. And I realized that the people I've been working with the entire time were her grandparents. I was like, oh, shucks. And so when I thought about I wanted to make sure I had somebody who was young woman of color, African American, to work on this project as well. And yeah, I tried to bring as many people. Sandra Gutierrez, who wrote a Latino Southern Table. So Southern Latino Table. Cheryl Day, who is phenomenal. She used to have a bakery with her husband Griff down in Savannah, with back in the day bakery.
Yep.
And Cheryl's amazing story is her great-great-grandmother in slavery was a baker and brought that with her into freedom and made her living probably from cooking and baking as a business. It's multi-generational. And then Bill Smith helped me out with a couple things. I think of Bill Smith as like my Southern gay grandfather. And he's seen a lot. John Martin Teller used to be the road manager for the B-52s for quite some time before he starts writing Hoppin' John's Low Country Kitchen. So you talk to these gentlemen, there's a whole history there, a whole story of lives. I wanted to make sure people recognized the Chinese South, recognized the Jewish South, recognized the Kurdish South, recognized the Latino South, recognized in fact that indigenous people are still very strong parts of Southern culture. They're not ghosts, they are not forgotten. They're still a Cherokee nation, they're still a Tsalagi nation, still a Muskogee nation, still a Choctaw, Chetamacha. These people still exist. Seminole, Miccosukee, etc. I wanted to make sure, especially introduction, that I made the case for acknowledging and respecting women and women's roles in the South beyond just the traditional mama, grandma. No, women are innovators in Southern food. Women are entertainers in Southern food. Lena Richard, black woman, is the first person to have a Southern food show through Louisiana. Then, while later, Nally Dupree and many others. And I want to make sure people understand the queer South has always manifested itself through food. Craig Claiborne wasn't from New York, he was from the South. Bill Neal, kind of a traumatic and tragic story, but you have to recognize his role in creating and shaping contemporary Southern cuisine. And Bill Smith, of course, is the inheritor of that. Ben Mims, I said this at John Birdsall's thing. Ben Mims, myself, we're here, we're queer, we have hummus. So, with the role that we play, and I think for a lot of us, I think I may have said this then, it's that the grandmother's kitchen becomes a place of refuge for the queer male. And queer women have a role too. This most entertaining, fun, and glaring example is from literature, Fanny Flagg. Fried green tomatoes is about a lesbian cafe. If you didn't know, the movie is you sort of get the little hint, but the book is.
I read it.
Right?
I saw the movie yesterday. That was gay.
Yeah. Ma'am, see, heard. And I just think that I just wanted to make sure the book had certain other notes to it, like the fact that we name people after food. I mean, if you saw Sinners, one of my favorite characters is Cornbread, right? But we have dances named after food. The Chitlin Strut. I mean, I'd rather do the Cabbage Patch than the Chitlin Strut.
Cakewalks.
Oh, right. Oh, my God. The cakewalk. That's right in front of our face example. The fact that our food has names like Limp and Susan. What?
Why is she limping?
Why is she limping? Why is he hopping? What's going on? What's going on? Right? Right, Hop and John. And it's because the food is our family. We give it nicknames. Lisa, you, Aaron, you, all y'all in the audience who have a Southern background, you know you have relatives. You didn't know their names until there was a funeral, a graduation, or a wedding, a real name. Until then, they had a nickname that you didn't know was a nickname. So my glaring example is my granddaddy had a junior. My father was not a junior. My father was named William. My grandfather had a son later on, Gonsley Jr. I never knew his name was Gonsley Jr. until I was 39. Until then, he was Uncle Fat Boy. I literally thought, and by the way, he is not as sexy and corpulent as I am. He is literally all muscle. This is one of them South Carolina brothers from the country. You'd be like, oh, no. I ain't messing with him ever. He's a mechanic. One of the best mechanics in the area. Huge arms. And I was like, I literally thought this man's name was Fat Boy. Like on his birth certificate, it said, Uncle Fat Boy. You know, we had a Bubba. We had an Aunt Bertha, a Grammy. We had, what is Tyler Perry's character called? Medea. We had a Medea. See, people don't understand that Medea is a play on Medea Euripides and Medea, one of the Black grandmama terms. It's a lot deeper than people think. And all these things, granddaddy, sister. I literally thought my grandmother's sister's name, or one of her 7 siblings, was named Sister. Well, she had 5 sisters, for God's sakes, but one of them got the name Sister. You know, then I figured out, wow, that it takes a little bit of finagling to know people's real names, real identities, because we nickname things we love, right? And so the food does that too. The food is in our songs. People sing certain spirituals and things to move along the process of cooking something. There's songs that accompany a lot of the Cajun food traditions, like the boucherie, which is when they slaughtered the cochon au lait, the suckling pig. So there's you could write a 1,000,000-page book, which I think I will do before I leave this earth. But
I think you have it in you.
I think if I have it in me. So how are we doing on time?
Not well.
No.
Speaking of which,
okay,
we could be here for hours.
Round it out, my brother. That's why I have him here.
We have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. 2 questions. 3. Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's see how this goes.
All right. Thank you. Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much to both of you for being here for a wonderful conversation. My name is Nathan, and I'm a recent graduate of Montgomery College here in the DC area. I'm currently working in Jewish education here in this area, and in reading The Cooking Gene, one thing that I found very interesting was reading about the interview that you did with your grandmother at the age of 13 about your great-grandfather. And I was wondering, what I was wondering is was there anything that your grandmother said that really, was there anything specific that your grandmother said that really left a particularly strong impression or memory? And also, I'm hoping long-term to continue working in education. Is there any way, is there any way you would recommend, what would you say are some particularly effective ways for educators to teach about family history and recording and preserving family history to their students?
Thank you, Nathan. I appreciate that. Because many of you know I was a religious school teacher in Montgomery County for 15 years. Every gray hair in my head. 7th grade Hebrew school. But I do miss it sometimes. because it's a valuable way. So let me answer in order. In quick fashion, my grandmother taught me a lot about her world. There were not a lot of Black elders who would share the more traumatic elements of their childhood. My grandmother did. And my grandmother specifically said to me, I want you to be able to survive. And here I am in a Jesse Jackson, soon to be Barack Obama world. And understanding why she said that, now I understand. But my grandmother, they really loved my great-grandfather. He was a very kind and loving man. He was also very protective of his family. And I was, a firebrand of a kid, and my grandmother would often say, all right, Joe Todd. And she would talk about how he would often not eat. He was a short man. He was very dark-skinned. And it was weird because his mother was what we call biracial. But his father's roots were pure African. And he was the woman he married, my great grandmother, Joseph and Mary, and yes, they had a kid born on Christmas Day, and the house had partially burned, so they were homeless. Which my great aunt, Aunt Jo, never let you forget. Oh, I was born the same day as Jesus, and my mama was Mary, and my daddy was Joseph. Oh my God. But she would talk about him in such a gloriful way. I mean, they would argue. They would like massive arguments. The three younger sisters, they were like, it was almost like a daddy loved me more than you kind of thing. And they remembered all different stories about him. It was crazy. But the thing about it got me was, the reason why I put possum and sweet potatoes in the book, that was one of his favorite things to eat. He was a country boy. He was not a Birmingham man. He was also functionally illiterate until my great-grandmother taught him how to read and write. He fought for this country in World War I. He was almost lynched coming back to the country because he only had a suit on, and they did not like Black soldiers in their suits. And great-granddaddy he would make stilts for his kids and make toys. They were very poor. They had just enough money to have a house and a garden. And at some point, they had a cow in the city of Birmingham and chickens and things. But he would make them toys. He would sit out there and play with them. And he was a good teacher. He kind of passed down. He knew how to talk to kids. And he never whooped them. He would not beat his children. My grandmother said to me one time, she said, yeah, we made our mother mad. And she said, Father, discipline these children. So he took them out to the outhouse or whatever. He said, all right, look, here's a bucket of water. I'm going to say, I'm going to whoop my leg, and I want y'all to cry out and start screaming and hollering. And then when you're done, put the water on your face. So, of course, my great-grandmother caught on to this real quick. And they would just laugh. They would just start giggling and just we nailed that one. And they would go under the porch. And one time, my grandmother was teaching her two younger sisters how to smoke corn silks. And that time, there was nothing great-grandfather could do. But he was a very loving husband. It's hard to talk about him without crying, even though I never knew this man. I've seen a couple of pictures of him. But he was a very loving husband. And he would not let his wife nor his children go to bed hungry. He would literally sit over there with a cup of tea or coffee and just, during the Depression, and let his children eat and his wife eat. And the thing that I remembered the most was she said that when the Klan would march, they were frequently to kind of terrorize the community. How do we know about that? And then she said great-granddaddy would have his shotgun and to be on the porch like he was about to hunt something. And here's this short little man. He didn't cross him. And he said, Mother, come on out here. Kind of like Mike Pence. Mother, come on out here and do your sewing. No, you come out here. Children, come out and play. And he said to them, laugh. He told them, laugh as loud as you can. And so my grandmother would be outside, the Klan marching by and just having a blast because her daddy told her to. And there they were. And he kept that gun cocked. And they didn't say a damn word. And when she used to say, all right, Joe Todd. I said, why you say that, Grammy? He says, you like my daddy come back to me. Now, when I went to Nigeria, Baba Tunde, Iya Tunde, Iya Tunde, my mother has returned to me. Baba Tunde, my father has returned to me. Why? Because the Yoruba, like in Kabbalah, believe in reincarnation to the family line. Yeah. Second question. I taught at Har Shalom and Temple Beth Ami and other places. And I often brought in this part of my identity. And also talked about, of course, with concept of Judaism and Jewish food. So we had whole classes on Jewish food, but I did it in a way they could understand. One time, we infamously made a chicken soup pizza. And there was no tomatoes. Please, guys, no tomato sauce. It was literally no chicken, no mixing of meat and dairy. Okay. But it was like kosher mozzarella and it was like all the aspects of chicken soup, right? The mirepoix, the osam, because, if it's not osam, that's not Jewish. And you put it all in one thing. And I had the kids learn about chickens in Judaism, the fact that we didn't have chickens in the time of Moshe. That wasn't a thing and all this stuff. But I really love teaching through food in all of my ways because when children learn through food, they learn ownership, they learn agency, and they learn connection to their ancestors. And they have to ask certain questions like, why do they use this? When did they have this? Why do they like these flavors and these tastes, right? Why is pomegranate and turmeric so important if you're a Persian? Why is, if you're Moroccan, why is, the sweet flavors and the couscous so important? If you're Ethiopian, the injera and the tej and all this stuff. So, also teaching them Jewish globalism, right? And also bringing in my southern part. Passover was wonderful for that because I'm teaching them about the fact that America had slavery and an impact. And teaching them that there's a whole history there. And that's how I developed my African-American Seder plate, was because I wanted the kids to be able to connect. And since then, I've learned, there was another presentation a couple years ago for Kosher Soul, I think. And I remember some folks came to the presentation at Smithsonian, and there was a group of Asian American Jews, and they said, I want you to know that because the African American Seder plate, we have our Asian American Seder plate. So it's a way of us integrating all the parts of ourselves in an American way. And I broke down because what that means is that there's still hope for us in multiculturalism, which I deeply believe in. And a person in this room, there's one thing, not one. And as I often like to say, I've never been in a room full of people where I'm not related to at least 5 people genetically. So I don't know who you are, but you could be white, black, brown in the middle or otherwise, but we're probably related. And that's beautiful because we're all made in the image of God. Wow, that was a nice sermon. Please put your donations in a basket. We don't have a whole lot of time, but I will take another question or two. Hi.
Hi,
Thank you.
my name's Jamila. My quick question is, do you think you'll ever write another cookbook featuring the recipes that you didn't put in this cookbook?
No. The editing process has already begun. Like Cooking Gene, Rice for Savor the South for UNC Press. Then comes Kosher Soul, Black, Jewish, Southern Food, all that. Then comes this book. I got to figure something else out. I really was never the one to just do things that I came up with because I know how wicked people can be in the food audience world. Like that New York Times thing, every recipe. Well, the chicken I eat, the recipe is blah, 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 from this, from 1983, and I improved it by the time the man got done, it wasn't my chicken. I don't know whose chicken that was, but it wasn't mine. And I don't like that. I respect the people on the page that I cook from. I'm not trying to have the ghost Edna Lewis come to my house and whoop me, make me cut a switch. I ain't trying to do that. I want her to stay at peace in the ancestral realm. I really don't dig that. And I think that would kind of like lose all flavor for me if I had somebody did that. So that my vulnerability has a limit. I'll tell you all about stripping down He-Man at 5, but I ain't gonna tell you a lick about. I would not want somebody to do my food, so I would never do that. But I think that now that you've said that, I do want to do things like expand our concept of West African food, because I think that a lot of African Americans, as we learn more about our heritage and identity, want to do that. But I think there are some borders, and I'm not trying to be culturally insensitive. But palm oil alone, like enough things have happened to our genetics and our bodies that certain things that are very common in Africa are not so easy for us. Like, you've seen the amount of palm oil in certain dishes. Ooh, cardiac. Ooh, other things. But for West Africans, it's not the same situation. I learned that the fufu and other things that people eat, the banku and other fermented things, are the reason why you can have a high carbohydrate diet in West Africa that does not affect the body the same way European style high carbohydrates affect us, because they have that, what is it, prebiotic or probiotic? What's the right word? Prebiotic element that's built in that makes it the digestion, it makes the absorption of certain nutritious elements, all that work a different way than those things would for us. So I kind of want to work on that. Because I think there's a value in the flavor profile, and there's a value in acknowledging that connection and further. But yeah, I don't know. I also don't want to make nobody mad, because certain parts of the South are very dogmatic about how things are flavored, how things should taste. Not everybody, someone reminded me last night in New York, in Brooklyn, that their people did not over-season, multi-season their food. They like plain black country cooking. I don't know how to do that now, right? One lady said on the net, she said, "Oh yeah, my grandma don't use no broth, she uses water." Well, good for her. My grandmother, and she wasn't fancy, it was just like not wasting anything, right? She had like a pot on the stove, and then she goes through the collard ribs and like the carrot pieces and garlic pieces and onion tops and bottoms, throws them into the, I mean, you could call it, stock or whatever. Okay, great. But it was just not wasted because it's childhood depression. Mm-hmm. And then that becomes the pot liquor. That becomes the liquid that goes into the sauce. It was never just plain water. And one of the tips and techniques I put in this book is my grandmother used to take an onion and put 2-3 cloves in it, and then put that in the chicken and dumplings and the soup. And so everything we ate had like a very specific sort of like other taste to it. So it didn't just taste just basic and boring. Now, as we wind down, I want you to pray for somebody on the internet. You know that sister from England who does like the judging the food from potlucks? There were some Southern folks on there, they weren't us, and they made potato salad.
Oh, what? Uh-oh. Oh, no.
Baby. The potato salad consisted of potatoes from a can.
Oh.
First of all, I didn't know potatoes could come from a can. And then she was like, "Oh, I gotta make a potato salad." She dumps out the can, liquid and all. And then she dumps an entire container of mayonnaise, and it wasn't Duke's, on top of this potatoes. Not a lick of pepper, not a green pepper, not an onion, nothing. Oh my God, it was trifling. And I was just like, of course she went, "Death row." And it was just like, okay. But that's what it was. No, I wish she had. It would have had more flavor. Ugh. So on a last note, I think one of the things that I appreciate about this book the most is that one thing I didn't say, we gotta say before we close out, and then we gotta go, sign books, is the fact that I had to take 15, 16 recipes. I felt the obligation. Not for the oreille de cochon, the pig's ears, Cajun, which are not pig's ears, they're like a fried pastry with cane syrup and pecan. For things like potato salad, things like fried chicken, I was like, okay. The variations, okay, great. But also looking at the recipes, laying cake, hummingbird cake, this, caramel cake. I have a tree nut allergy, so a lot of the pecans, and I would love to put them in, but I can't. So I couldn't test the recipes. But the bottom line is you would look at the whole, like 15, 16 recipes across all these books. 1820, 1850, 1890, 1910, 1930, 1940, 1960, and so on and so on and so on. And decide what is authoritative. Knowing that someone's gonna pick up this book and go, "You've done this too, you all have done this. You've picked up a book, you've been excited about it. But you open it up, and you go to the recipe that you know is the signature recipe for you. And what do? You sit up there and you go, "Oh, I ain't buying this." They put that in there. Next. Cancel it out. That's what I was afraid of with this book. But this is for all Southern people. Southerners are a family. We're dysfunctional, but we are still a family. And we have the largest cultural and culinary region in the country, expanded all over. And I hope that you all enjoy it because there's a lot of hard work. It's my heart and soul. And it also happens to be published in 2025. Well, it's 1925 because my mom's mom was born in 1925. And unfortunately, she didn't live to be 100, but well. But when I was 11 years old, I told Grammy, she said, can you help me with this? And that made her really mad. I could debate with chores with my elders. Some of y'all could not do that. And so my grandmother was like, what are you doing? What's so important? And I said, Grandma, you don't understand. I mean, anxious, ADHD child, anxious. You don't understand, Grammy. I got to write this book now. It's a book about the South. It's going to make me famous one day. I'm 48 years old. I was 11 then. And I dedicate this book as a birthday present, 100th year birthday present to my Grammy, who was the reason why I am here. And my dear mama, who was my best culinary teacher. And my daddy, who taught me how to barbecue and tried to teach me how to hunt. That didn't go so well. And fish and other things. And understand nature and pick medicines out of the woods. And my grandfather, Gonzalez, who was one of the founding members of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. My other grandfather, who was Alabama born and raised, who was a dedicated Africanist. And my other grandmother, who was of the tobacco fields of Prince Edward County. And furthermore, and I want to thank you, Aaron, because I chose you for a very specific reason. I see you as a brother and a friend and someone who can, shepherd this old man through his memories and his journey. And I appreciate you for your patience, as well as that of our audience.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Twitty.